to other departments. So at this time, Mr. Binker, if you could respond to any of those or what was found out of OCA?
Sure. I'll go in order if that's fine. Can everybody hear okay? Okay.
Well, we are live, so you might.
You got it. Okay. So first, as it relates to any charter regulation of in-person versus remote work by the internal auditor, charter is silent on this. There's language in the charter that references that the person is working full-time. But there's no reference at all to where that person is working. And if anything, I think the language of within the charter that the internal auditor would be auditing the activities of multiple different departments would indicate, if anything, that they would be not always necessarily sitting in the office up here, but perhaps going different places throughout the city. But certainly they could work remotely. There's nothing prohibiting that. So that would be a determination made by obviously the council and or through its council employees, the employment rules. I think the council president has a certain amount of latitude in regulating the day-to-day activities of the internal auditor. But remote work could be permitted. It is not prohibited. I'll pause in case anybody has any questions about that.
When it comes, so since it could be an option there, we would just have to look at the verbiage. Will we have to do any changes on that? Or-
No, I mean, I'll say, and I don't want to speak for HR. They know how to put this stuff in like job postings much better than I do. But I've seen job postings. I've seen job postings elsewhere as well as the city. Usually if it's the desire of the hiring body, council, that somebody has the ability to work remote, you would explicitly say this post is eligible for part-time remote work or full-time remote work, or this is a position that is in office only. That's something that I think you would want to spell out clearly in the posting. And then obviously once that person is working at the city,
in the office.
Thank you. And I do have one follow-up question for you. In other offices and in other organizations, it's often said that, you know, a remote work policy is a privilege and not necessarily a right. So in terms of city employees who are eligible to work remotely, hybrid, you know, 1 day a week, whatever it is there something laid out or a parameter in which a supervisor or manager or director could say to that particular employee, this isn't working out. We're going to scale back your remote work and you will be expected to work in office.
Yes, so remote work for city purposes falls within the collective bargaining agreements and under the flexible work schedules. I can let Dennis speak more to the language, but yeah, that is an option. And if the work is not being performed satisfactory to the specifications, then that's something that can be in collaboration with the employee, have a discussion, and just like you would with any other employment issue.
Thank you.
Is that part of, would it be a remote? Would that be like, a remote work agreement? Do you have those set in stone prior for those individuals who are working remotely? So it spells out, scheduling. So if you allot just the 1 day to come in office, is that spelled out? And then, also if workload, starts to dwindle, would that be also included in that some type of agreement so that there's those checks and balances? Just to piggyback a little bit off of Councilwoman Pelibonic.
So we would refer back to the collective bargaining agreement, the provisions that provide for flexible work schedules. We're not going to enter into separate agreements with employees outside of those. So that's something that is addressed within that scope of that language. Dennis, do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, there's no individual policies. There is a provision for discussion amongst employees, but at the end of the day, everything is left to the director's discretion. So it can be ended at any time, started or ended. So, and schedules changed as needed. So.
Anything else from the committee on the first question? Yes. Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. Not so much a question, just a comment that I don't know what the final review for us looks like, but I'll be making a motion or a suggestion that we have some type of hybrid or work from home within this internal auditor position posting, because I think we should have had it in the past, but I think that it will attract a
there's 15 attorneys and one of the attorneys is contracted as like the full-time lawyer for this company. They're still employed by the firm, but their job is exclusively to work on this company's business. So that's the kind of arrangement that you would have to have. And I would just say that the drawback to that is the terms of the employment are going to be covered by an employment contract that is not necessarily the contract that, you're going to be signing a contract with, pick an audit firm. And they might want, if it's a contract that they are managing, they might want to set their own terms as to how that happens. Also, it would be interesting, to determine how you would go forward with, right, where's their place of work? I mean, when you're talking about remote work, are they remote if they're working at their office at audit firm X instead of at their office in City Hall? And those kinds of things, management of the employee become different. I mean, the council would be giving up a lot of control over how that person does their job. They would still take direction, but where a lot of the specifics would be, they'd be filtered through a third party, which just makes it a little bit more complicated. But other than that, it could be done.
Thank you. So next, there was conversation or questions regarding if there could be a non-compete clause within the job description to avoid additional turnover to other department areas based off of the history of our IAs.
Sure. Again, so I looked. Everyone. It's good for government to get taxes from the person earning a wage. It's good for the person to earn a wage to spend money and pay to be alive. So limiting that, there has to be a really clear interest. And under the Michigan law, let me get to that. It has to be connected to reasonable competitive business interests, and it has to be reasonable as to its duration, how long it lasts, the geographical area, and the type of employment or line of business. If it is found to be unreasonable in any respect, the court may limit the agreement, or so the court can change the agreement to make it reasonable, or it can eliminate it, make it non-enforceable. I could not find any cases in Michigan involving application of this in a public scenario. I will also say that generally, limitations on employment in public employment are extremely disfavored. And looking at the considerations that the courts use for not when they're analyzing a non-compete law, a non-compete clause. It has to be a situation where something about the employment at the first employer would give the next employer an unfair competitive advantage within the marketplace. And I don't know that we could succeed on that test, because there isn't really a marketplace where the city is within the sphere of like the market. The city is not competing with itself to do anything. The city is more or less working with itself to do things. I know that, components of the city don't necessarily always agree with other components of the city, but they're not in direct competition for money at the market. And there's also a clear statement that it's limited to specific knowledge that a person would have about an industry or a field and not to the experience. Or so if somebody worked as the internal auditor and gained experience as to how municipal finance works, for example, or how the city runs its books, and then use that general experience and knowledge to move into a different position within the city. Similarly, if somebody was in the finance department of the city and moved to become an internal auditor, that experience and knowledge that's the kind of thing that you definitely cannot have a non-compete to limit the spread of. It would be more applicable if you had a situation where, and this doesn't really arise for Lansing because Lansing is the sort of the big driver in the region. But if you had, this is just me thinking of the only way I could think it possibly working, you would have to have two competing municipalities and somebody steals somebody else's internal auditor and then gets a whole bunch of information about what's going on inside of Lansing. The challenge to that, again, is in this specific example where we're talking about somebody, the internal auditor, our finances are more or less public, right? The budget is passed publicly. The money is spent publicly. People can come and FOIA all the contracts. They periodically do. And so those things aren't exactly kept secret to begin with. And furthermore, at least for the internal auditor position, I know that because there is some sensitive information that they get to see that not everybody gets to see, detail at an HR level about individuals within the city and things like that, and other finances that might, not necessarily be broadcast through other means. They sign a non-disclosure agreement, and the cases talk about how non-disclosure agreements are by far the favored way to deal with the improper flow of information, because there's a much cleaner way to enforce that as the mechanism. So I hope that answers the question. But if there are more questions, I'm happy to provide answers.
Kind of talk high level on what would be our next steps as far as job description language. We would need to revisit that job description that was the most recent one that was posted, because we would have to make some alterations with that if we decide to move forward with offering that as an option, and then what that would look like as far as moving forward with candidacies and posting. So I'll open the floor to the committee on any conversation that would need to be discussed on the IA position.
Just for discussion purposes, quickly, I think, and again, this is the current posting, right? All these different pages on it. I think that all we need to add is probably the hybrid part. I don't know if we need to reinvent the wheel as far as the description. I mean, I skimmed through it. I didn't read it completely through, but it's like it was for the previous internal auditor position that, we did get candidates for, maybe not a lot of great ones, but we did get multiple candidates. So with the hybrid thing, I don't know what other changes need to be made, but that's just my first thoughts.
So you're saying, the portion, full-time instead of on-site, full-time on-site positions, changing that verbiage right on that line item under description?
Yeah, wherever it's at.
Okay.
I mean, right. because that would be the proper section for it.
Mhm. Okay.
I just want to make a statement for the committee to consider. Every year you have new council leadership. And that could change how because you stated earlier about council leadership working with the person on the hours and stuff like that. I just don't want to have the council consider changing this to stay hybrid. And then if new council leadership comes in and they don't want to have that person work hybrid, you've advertised it as hybrid. And so now all future leadership, as long as this person is here, will have to agree for hybrid. So I don't know if you want to put that here, but then maybe elaborate somewhere else in the posting somehow. I don't know. I just don't want the city to be open for that.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I'm wondering if there is some way that we could make that as just an option versus putting it in the full description, but make it where it is, it doesn't look like it's one at the top, but where it could be where it is a feasible option to have hybrid or remote working. And we could still exclude the onsite in the description, but still make it where to Ms. Boak's point that with the council leadership changing, we could still have some options when it comes to changing that lingo.
Yeah, like maybe not saying hybrid.
Mhm.
You could say optional hybrid. And then when the people apply and they come in for the interview, then it could be clarified with them.
That makes sense. Councilwoman Palivanagu.
Thank you. So I have a bit of a issue with that. And really when I think about the core of my issue, it stems from the fact that the internal auditor will be essentially conceptually reporting to a different person every year as council leadership may change from year to year. And I think the fact that we can't guarantee that this employee will have the same supervisor year over year. If I'm that employee, that's an issue for me. I try to put myself in this potential employee's shoes. If there were a way, and I guess I would lean on our HR professionals, maybe to develop some language. Maybe it's for the job posting and maybe it's a consideration. In addition, maybe for our council rules. And I'll be transparent. I'm not exactly sure how we would go down that road to amend that, but I feel strongly that if we put in an option for hybrid work and we put in the parameters for hybrid work for an internal auditor or any position that reports to council, that it needs to be understood moving forward that that is what future leadership will work with. I'm not exactly sure how that's accomplished, but that's a very strong feeling that I have, just so that we can have continuity with all of our employees.
Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you. Just a thought on that, and I don't know if the city attorney can weigh in, but basically if we put the hybrid language and then put subject to review and change every second week in January, then and then they say, what's that all about? And then we can, if they ask, we can explain it, but it at least puts a person on notice that this is hybrid, but it could be possible that it would get changed. And why the date? Obviously, because that's when the first week is when leadership's picked, and then that person would probably have last year's experience because it would be I guess, could be a new person, but it's probably a person that was on there. So I don't know if that would pass muster.
And I think maybe Ms. O'Leary, you can speak to this. Could that potentially be more of a deterrence from getting applicants if we have it subject to change on an annual basis. Just, I see where you're going with that, and Councilwoman Pelly Bonaglu, and I'm just trying to figure out, maybe it just takes some brainstorming on this point, but language is important, and we're in the state currently where working hybrid is important to many individuals, and I don't want to deter anyone from applying if they're qualified with a subject to change on an annual basis. So maybe, I don't know if you could shed some light on that or your thoughts.
Yes. I think we can absolutely help you craft some language that encompass the goals that you have for creating a more flexible workspace when it comes to hybrid work. And we're happy to do that. I mean, we can look at some of the language we've already developed to see if that may work with some edits to figure out what works for you. And also, I would say from a candidate perspective, you want to know the expectations going in so you can plan your life around the expectations you have in the workplace. So happy to send you some language on once we've had some time, and we can also work with city attorney too on that. So
No, that would be helpful. Thank you. Do we have any other conversation or questions regarding discussion item C? Councilwoman Pelly Bonaglu.
Thank you. Just looking at our most recent posting, I just want to jump to the salary, educational requirements. I'm comfortable with leaving those requirements and those parameters as they were written for our most. Yes, for our most recent posting. I am comfortable with that. And again, I will just reiterate my previous comment as I look to the education and experience requirements. We're looking for a highly qualified individual, a highly educated individual, and to expect for their workspace to fluctuate or change year over year is not I don't think that that the typical candidate would encounter that if they were applying to other organizations. So I would like to go back to my first point that for this position in particular, this is the one we're discussing right now. I would like to see some parameters built out around continuity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the committee? So as far as discussion item C, thank you, Ms. O'Leary. You're gonna look to send some language on crafting some language on what that would look like for the job description so that we are consistent with any candidates, potential candidates. And to your point, Councilwoman Pelly Bonaglu, the education experience and the compensation, I am curious to know if we have looked to see if those are comparable still as of date, to see if that's still the same across the board in comparison to other municipal internal auditors. So if that's possible, if you could look through that and provide that context back to the committee, that would be great. The next item we have is discussion item D, filling vacancy on the council legislative analysis. So in our packet, we have a few different examples. On this position. I know from our last conversation, we kind of talked about, could we potentially change the title of the position name? And if there was some language that we could carve out for this particular position. So I'll open it up to the floor. I will say that some of the position titles that I came across are very similar. So I guess we would just have to have that discussion openly to see if we want to change that title from legislative analysis to something different. And then there was a description in our packet. And let's see. under job duties on page 20 of 32 for the departmental analysis, that those job duties were very detailed and I highlights a lot of what we were looking for based off of what was discussed at our last meeting. So, but I'm open for conversation on this particular position.
Thank you. So I was actually looking more at page 25 of 32. Now, this example that we have is more the juvenile justice analyst, but we have some points that have been circled under essential duties and responsibilities. And I've had the opportunity to read through those. And I think that those very closely hit to what we are trying to accomplish with hiring a legislative analyst. So that's my contribution for there. It's such a, it is detailed, but it's a very long list on the page that Councilwoman Carter referenced in the beginning of this discussion. And I think that as a complement to that initial list, I think some of these more in-depth or pointed duties and responsibilities fold in very well with what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, I did look at those also. I feel like there could be a combination. I didn't mark all of the points on the job duties of page 20, but there are some that kind of overlap as well. So I think it could be a nice combination because we're creating this from ground up. I think it's at our discretion to really tap into the bullet points because what I would not like to see is that something goes missed. So we want to make sure we're covering from top to bottom. So I think we could join both job responsibilities and essential duties and then see where we can come collectively together on what that would look like and then propose that out. That sounds good. Any other thoughts?
I remember.
Councilman Jackson?
So I don't know if it's gonna be our committee's job or if we're working with HR, but you know how each of them has like job description, duties, salary, like different headings. Are we gonna come up with all the headings? Because I think once we get the headings, we can figure out exactly what needs to go under them. Even though I appreciate there are some similarities with these. So, because there are definitely gonna be some necessary headings like that was previously mentioned, and there might be some that aren't. And are we gonna flush out all of those, or is HR gonna help us with suggestions?
Yeah, I would kindly ask for at least maybe a template for us to work with as we from HR specifically as we put together what job duties we're looking for. My assumption is that at least for our next few meetings, that be maybe more of a draft or living document as we finesse to find the right duties and responsibilities for this new position. But if we could have a template to work from, that would be very helpful.
All right. No, I agree with you. Why recreate the wheel? So thank you, Ms. O'Leary and your team for assisting us with that as well. Any other items for any of the discussions that we've discussed today, addressed today?
Maybe the last point, hopefully, is on the legislative analyst.
Analyst.
So the general description, broad, right? And then the specific duties are kind of specific, but I still think we should err on the side of being broad and general so that, because I can't imagine anybody would do this, but it comes up like this isn't in the job description. Or look, there's 20 dots here of things that I'm gonna do and you know, this isn't one of them, what you're asking me to do. So we should try to use our collective minds to anticipate all the things that we might need for this position, all the things that the future council might need, and try to incorporate it.
Councilwoman Palibano.
Thank you. I would also ask HR for a scale of competitive salaries for similar positions to this. This will be our first legislative analyst or policy person. And so if we could have at least an idea of what a competitive salary range would be for a similar position, that would be very helpful as well.
And we may want to also look at backgrounds. So if there's any specific educational needs or experience that is necessary, that would also be helpful. Thank you. Any other items or information to share with item discussion C? So our next business is to set another meeting. And we want to make sure, Ms. O'Leary, you and your team have adequate time to do the research and get the information back to the committee. So let's see, where would that put us?
We could do 2 weeks again. That's June 19th. We're closed.
Mm,
3 weeks would be the 26th. If you wanted to provide a month out, we're into July 3rd. If we can keep with the Thursdays.
How does June 26th work? Same time, 4 o'clock? Would that still be okay with having it in the chamber?
We have no other.
Oh, we don't have any
conflicts.
conflict
Yeah,
on
no
that day?
conflicts that
Okay.
day, so we'd be in the back conference room.
Okay.
I agree with June 26th, and it avoids the week of the 4th of July
Mhm.
holiday as well.
Is that an adequate time? Perfect. All right, so our next meeting on Committee on Personnel, June 26th at 4 PM in the conference room. Any other matters to discuss at this time? All right. Well, we are adjourned at